I took 6 different flash selfies on my Canon G7X to compare 5 different settings for you guys so that you can replicate the flash photo results that you want and learn a little bit more about how to adjust the exposure triangle as you're shooting. So if you want to learn all of the different settings that I used and the differences that they made, keep on watching. Let's start with my warmest photos, which are my manual settings for flash photography. The shutter speed is 1/320. I have it set at f11, and that was just what I was shooting on earlier. But this is gonna make everything in the background super crisp as well. So if you want a blurry bokeh sort of background, you're gonna wanna drop your f-stop. I set my exposure at 0. I didn't feel like I needed to change it. My ISO is 640. This is gonna add a little bit of noise and a little bit of grain and texture to your image. The white balance is flash, which gives that really nice warm golden tone. The lighting is making it pull a little bit green. That's just because it was a little bit cloudy when I was taking the photo and it kind of pulled green based on the tint of my windows. And overall, it has a lot of contrast. It has really good detail in the foreground in terms of, you can see, because my hair is very dark, you can see the ringlets, you can see the different pieces. It gives you so much, like it gives you a lot of that classic Canon photo, which it gives you a lot of that classic Canon flash photography that I really like. And these are the settings that I honestly use more often than not, but they can be a little bit tricky with manual trying to dial it in. So the other settings that I did were all under scene mode and portrait, which are your most straightforward white balance colors. And I think that's a little bit easier because instead of always doing it on manual and like me where you're kind of constantly fiddling with your white balance, this does it for you. And I would really recommend that if you are especially getting other people to take your photos. So this second photo is shot at a shutter speed of 1/1600. My aperture I dropped down to f2.0, which means that the background is going to have a lot of blur and a lot of bokeh. Then my exposure is my exposure is -1 1/3. This was to drop the background so that there wasn't as much detail visible and it made it a lot darker. My ISO was 125 to make it a very crisp and clear image. I like this a lot. This is a very high contrast photo though, between me, the subject with the flash, and then my background that is dark. So if you want a little bit more, if you want a little bit less separation between your subject and your background, you're gonna wanna drop the shutter speed, and I will share with you my settings for that later. The next 2 photos that I took are taken on the exact same settings, but legitimately because the lighting changed between one photo and the other, the colors look different, and this is why I wanted to point it out. So these settings are 1/1250, f2, and then again, exposure -1 1/3, ISO 125. I dropped this a little bit I increased my shutter speed a little bit to make the background a little bit less dark and a little bit more reflective of daytime, because it does look like these photos were taken at night, even though they were taken mid-afternoon. So I wanted to kind of bring a little bit more daytime back to it. To be honest, you probably want to slow down your shutter speed even more than this if you wanted something like this, but a little bit more detail in the back. You can also raise your aperture if you want to pick out even more detail in the back so that there's more in focus in the shot. Okay, so if you want your background to be lighter, but you want yourself to be still illuminated, I would really recommend having your shutter speed set to like 1/60 or 1/80. You're gonna wanna slow it down enough that you're letting more light in, but not so slow that you are getting a lot of movement, especially if you're like me and taking a selfie, or you have somebody who's a little bit less steady. You still want it to be fast enough to capture the moment, but slow enough to let in some light. I also changed my f-stop here to 4.5, and this is usually, if I'm taking a flash photo, I kind of want my shutter, like my aperture around, 4.5, 5, 5.6, that sort of range. It's a really nice balance between the foreground and the background, just enough blur to pick you out in the foreground, but you still get detail in the back so that if you're shooting in front of something really interesting, you can still kind of tell what that is. Exposure is left at neutral, and then ISO at 125 for a nice crisp and clear image. finally, these are probably the settings that are the most balanced between foreground and background for contrast. This was shot at 1/640. My aperture is f2, my exposure is 0, and my ISO is 120. These are like great neutral middle ground settings where your background's not super dark, it's not super light. You can tell that there's a flash, but you can still tell if you're shooting in the day that it is daytime, especially if you're inside, and they're really fun. So those are the 6 photos and the 5 different settings that I used. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any other questions, let me know and I will try my best to answer them.